Hi folks, earlier this afternoon I did a live call on Teams with the higher media class, quite a lot of you in there, which was great to see, but just because you weren't able to make that, I didn't want you to miss out on one of the key things we talked about, which was a summary of the key ideas that came up in the media theory reading from our last task, which was related to the theorists Curran and Seaton. Some people said they found this a little bit hard to get their head around without me being there to talk them through it, which I totally appreciate, so I thought I'd go over it in the video call, and I thought why not make a quick video to go over it with those who couldn't make it. Media theory is really key to understanding the media landscape, and a better understanding of the media landscape results in better pieces of writing and analysis later on in the course. So it's important we have a look at people like Curran and Seaton. So what were their key ideas about the modern media landscape? Let's have a look at the key things I wanted you to take away from that piece of reading. First of all, concept one, that the media is controlled by a small number of companies that make products to create profits. So, Curran and Seaton were uncertain about how positive a force capitalism was in creating the media landscape, when all they cared about, the media companies that is making money. So they said that globalization, the idea of the world getting smaller, has concentrated media ownership into the hands of a few companies. You'll remember, hopefully from the first task, I asked you to have a wee look at the number of different media outlets that Disney owned and how surprising that might have been for you to discover that although you thought you were consuming different types of media, they were in fact all coming from the same money holders at the very top of that food chain. Media conglomerates are horizontally and vertically integrated to maximise profit. So what does that mean? What are Curran and Seaton talking about? Let's visualise it, okay? Horizontal integration is when a media company like News Corp own multiple outlets of the same kind. So News Corp own the Sunday Times, the Sun and the Times, all newspapers. They have a much bigger profit share in the newspaper industry because they own multiple different papers. So even if you think you are buying something different, if you think you're buying the Sunday Times because it's different from the Sun, you are in fact sending your money to pretty much the same person at the top. What about vertical integration? That is when a media company own all the different stages of production, distribution and promotion. So Disney are a good example there. They don't have to negotiate with anybody else to get their media content out there. They own the means of production. So they own a production company like 20th Century Fox, for example. They own distribution. They can put their media content straight onto Disney Plus and we can stream it in our homes. They also own the promotion and subsidiary services. They own the shops on the high street and in shopping centres that can sell all of their merchandise. An example, if you signed up to Disney Plus when it launched in the UK, you might have been quite excited to see The Mandalorian, the Star Wars TV show, produced by Disney, distributed through Disney Plus, and all of those Baby Yoda toys will be on sale in the Disney store when they reopen after the pandemic is over, one would imagine. So in both cases, it's about making sure you have more of the profit. You don't have to share as much of that money. And Curran and Seaton think that horizontal integration and vertical integration really limits the scope of media. So they also say that large-scale media producers rely on advertising to generate income. Let's think of a hugely successful television show in the UK, for better or worse, Love Island, okay? Sponsored by Just Eat. If you have watched an episode of Love Island, before it starts, at the bumper of every ad break at the end, there's an advert asking you to get stuck in, Just Eat sponsoring Love Island. So it's reliant on that advertising income. They have to keep making that show. They have to make it as successful as possible because the main way that they make money is from advertisers choosing to advertise their products in the ad breaks, or from a sponsorship deal like this where Just Eat will give them a huge chunk of change to be the one major brand that people who watch that show can see. And Curran and Seaton think that if advertising is what drives the creation of media texts, then that limits what it is that people are actually seeing. We'll go on to illustrate that here. So if advertising drives media companies to produce products that have mass audience appeal, then perhaps that reduces the variety of media products that we actually get exposed to. So here are some examples of mass appeal products: The X Factor, The Great British Sewing Bee, The Greatest Dancer, Come Dine With Me, Cruising with Jane McDonald. If you don't know what those shows are, I'm fairly sure you have seen a programme that is quite like them. And that is another issue that Curran and Seaton see in this capitalist-driven, profit-driven media landscape, that all we end up seeing are different variations of the exact same show. And I'm going to get into that in a wee second. So let's look at concept number 2. Media concentration, this idea of it being owned by a small number of people, adversely affects media content. It has a negative effect on the content itself, the actual programs, the films, etc. that are made and broadcast. So the business function of the media industry takes precedence over its creative or public service capacities. So what Curran and Seaton are concerned about is that when you treat media exclusively as a business, then creativity takes a hit and public service takes a hit as well. They are concerned about the diverse group of writers, actors, directors, performers who never make it onto TV because they're not considered mainstream, and how many more informative and educational programs never make it onto primetime television because they don't serve the business very well. Profit-driven media is softened to create mass audience appeal. The example I used in the call was something like Ant and Dec's Saturday Night Takeaway. No harm to that programme or to Ant and Dec themselves, but it is a show that lacks edge. Why does it make so much money for the production company? Because advertisers fall over themselves to be part of the ad breaks for that show, because they know just about that nothing particularly controversial will ever happen on that show. It probably won't offend many people. It can be watched by a 5-year-old or a 95-year-old. It's very safe. It's been softened. It's got mass appeal. Nothing dangerous about it. Therefore, minority interest content is pushed to the margins of the broadcast schedules. I was thinking of a way to try and illustrate that. I'll come back quite often to the chat show, okay? The chat show is a format that people love to watch, and there are loads of different examples of it on the television schedules. But when we look a little bit further into it, there's some interesting comparisons to be made. Think about these two shows here, okay? The Big Nasty Show on Channel 4 and The One Show on BBC One. Very different shows, but kind of the same format. At their basis, they're the same thing. You know, a charismatic presenter invites celebrities on to chat about their latest book or film or album, and they have a bit of a laugh and entertain the audiences. But why is the Big Nasty Show on at 10:30 at night on Channel 4 on a Friday, but the One Show is on BBC One prime time at 7 o'clock in the evenings? Now, you could argue that it's to do with the content and the fact that the Big Nasty Show is a little bit edgier. It has sort of language and content warnings associated with it. But then we ask ourselves, would a show like that, even if it toned itself down, ever find itself on the primetime slot at 7 o'clock? Possibly not, because minority interests and your interpretation of minority may vary here. Minority interests, we could be talking about someone's race or gender or ethnicity. If something is deemed too minor, too minority based in its audience demographic, then maybe it won't make it onto the mainstream. And therefore the One Show is seen as something that is more popular, more palatable. It's going to be the thing that makes it on for its mass audience appeal, whereas the Big Nasty Show is something that's going to have a smaller audience, therefore it gets pushed to a late night slot. Curran and Seaton's concern is that, what about the creative people who work on a show like that? Like, why are they maybe never given the opportunity to be in a more prime time area? So it's a conversation we're thinking about. And then finally, free market competition produces format-driven products. We kind of hinted at this already, this idea that if you've got a free market where the competition is all about trying to produce the show that will have the biggest appeal, then you're going to end up with a whole bunch of shows that look exactly the same. So, for example, Come Dine With Me is a hugely successful show. How did Channel 4 capitalise on that and make more money? They make Couples Come Dine With Me. It's effectively the same show with a minor tweak. Why have they done that? Because Come Dine With Me's success encourages them to make a spin-off rather than make something brand new. And Curran and Seaton worry about what happens to the people that want to make the brand new shows. Similarly, Great British Bake Off, a huge hit on the BBC and on Channel 4. What do we do there? We make the Great British Sewing Bee, which is effectively the same show. It has the same format. It's just not about baking. It's about sewing. It's not about ingredients. It's about fabrics. So it's not really that much of a risk. Is the Sewing Bee as big as the Bake Off? No, but it's less risky to make something that's very similar to something else. It's more risky to do something that's very, very different. So, moving on from there, still thinking about concept number 2. these idea of minority interests being pushed to the margins, free market competition, producing format-driven products. Let's go back to thinking about the chat show. A big thing in America is the late night shows. So you may know some of them. Here are some of the hosts. So people in there, we've got Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, James Corden, for example. If you have a little look at who it is that fronts these shows, if you care to point out the pattern yourself, yeah, primarily white men, middle-aged usually. Why is that? Is it an issue of racism, or is it just because, as Curran and Seaton point out, if you're driving the media creation through free market competition, then people are going to keep making the things that are not going to result in any risk. So in this grid here, we can see in the centre there's Samantha Bee, who hosts a late night show, and then Trevor Noah at the top right, who hosts a late night show, The Daily Show. They are kind of unique to this lineup of TV presenters because Samantha Bee is a woman and Trevor Noah is a person of colour. Now, make your own judgments there on what the issue is that Curran and Seaton can see. It's probably quite risky if James Corden was to leave his show. Maybe the network would see it as a risk to appoint a woman or a person of colour to take over his show, because they would worry that too much change would result in less people watching, less money for the advertisers, the show starts to fail. So the capitalist ideology that Curran and Seaton are so concerned about is that we end up with less diversity on TV because people don't want to take risks. They want to stick to what's worked in the past. And a lot of these late night shows that go well back into the 1950s have always traditionally been hosted by middle-aged white male comedians. So that's what they stick with. So it's interesting to see what Curran and Seaton are concerned about when you apply it to a real life issue. And obviously that's a very kind of controversial issue. People will have different views on it, but I'm just trying to illustrate what their concern is when the media is so driven by profit and doesn't take risks. So their third concept, diverse ownership creates diverse products. So they think that if there was more diversity in who owned the media, we'd have more diverse products. So finally, to sum up what I've been talking about, they are just trying to highlight the damage that free market ideologies have had on the media landscape. What are they trying to say? That free market ideologies basically result in lots of entertainment that's exactly the same. Anything new, creative or edgy tends to be pushed to the side. Maybe it'll be on really late at night if you're lucky. Maybe it won't get made at all because they're worried about who will advertise alongside that programme. And also, it can affect the diversity of the people in front of the camera as well, that maybe people won't take what they perceive to be risks. They'll stick with what they think works and what audiences want to see based on money. Now, they do go on to talk about public service broadcasting, and they champion it. Curran and Seaton think that public service broadcasting is the way forward because it has impartial news, it serves minority audiences, and it champions national unity by offering inclusive rather than exclusive content. Now, in the UK, we do have a public service broadcaster, the BBC. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. Do they provide impartial news? Some people think they definitely do not provide impartial news and that there's definitely bias. But they do other things as well. In terms of championing minority audiences, quite recently, Bake Off winner Nadia Hussain had her own television documentary called Anxiety and Me. I watched it. It was very interesting. And I kind of wish it was on an earlier time so that everybody could have had a chance to see it. But it was buried late at night. It was on about 11 o'clock at night. And if we follow through Curran and Seaton's concerns, was it on late at night because the BBC were worried that like a mass audience wouldn't want to watch something about anxiety? It would educate and inform people. It was very educational and informative, but maybe that's not what they want to have on at 7 o'clock instead of the one show. It's also presented by a person of colour. Are they concerned about having a documentary on in prime time presented by a person of colour? Maybe not. Curran and Seaton would certainly say that they're probably going to err on the side of caution and not take that risk. In terms of serving minority audiences as well, BBC through their radio stations, they have the BBC Radio Asian Network, so a network of channels that is dedicated to that particular audience demographic. So in some ways, the BBC could be seen to champion the best of what Curran and Seaton think of public service. But at the same time, even though the BBC don't have advertising, they do seem to follow the idea that maybe anything that serves minority audiences maybe gets like fenced off and pushed to the end of the TV schedules, or it gets put into its own network and it's not broadcast on Radio 1, for example. So there's certainly criticisms to be had there. So those are the three key concepts, and I've tried to illustrate them with some examples about what Curran and Seaton are worried about. In a nutshell, they just think that if profit and money is the only thing that drives the creation of media, then we end up with very safe, non-diverse entertainment, and that's a disservice to the public, and that we deserve something that's more diverse, more interesting, more information-based, and more educational. Lots of different arguments could be had there, and if we were doing this in a classroom setting, I would love to field a debate with you, so we'll have to save that until August. Couple more things. Other notes from the live lesson, just in case you missed out. So first of all, we chatted a little bit about the assignment. I mentioned in my intro to Hire video that for the Hire assignment, people in the past have made short films, and other people have created an advertising campaign based on a film that they kind of create. So we were talking about the fact that the continuing COVID-19 situation and social distancing might mean that getting started on a film project, a short film where we would have to work in groups, might be quite difficult. So that when we come back in August, we may start to plan for everyone to do an advertising campaign poster series for a film of their invention for their assignment. And I'm going to post an example assignment on Teams. I'll notify you when it's there so that you can go have a little look at it and see like what kind of thing is it we have to have produced by next March. And second of all, your next task is on the concept of hegemony. That's right, it's a bit of a weird word, hegemony. I went through a PowerPoint for you guys on the live call. I've attached that already to Teams. There's a post in Teams with it there. So I'm not going to go over it here in this video because, like I said, I wanted to keep it a bit shorter. So if you want to, I would recommend having a look at that PowerPoint before you tackle your next higher media task, which is about the concept of hegemony, which ties into power structures, which is very much linked in with the Curran and Seaton stuff that we were talking about. As always, folks, you can contact me through Teams or through my email address, or you can tweet me at Mr_Duffin if you have any questions at all. This is a challenging course, and these are challenging times, but we will get there together. So get in touch with me if you need anything at all.